comes the sun, here comes the sun. I say it's alright. Darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. I say it's alright.
Okay, now, Nepal is a country that's situated between China and India, as is shown here. It has 55,000 square miles, and if you want to compare it to a country, let's say in Europe, it would be roughly the size of Switzerland and Austria combined. It's about 500 miles long between east and west, and at the maximum it's 56 miles long, wide from north to south. Now, the peak that we are attempting is about 150 miles west of Mount Everest, Annapurna 3, right here. The route that the expedition is planning to attempt goes up the buttress on the right-hand side. The team was planning to negotiate the rock wall, which is about 2,500 feet to 3,000 feet height, right up here, and up along this ridge, placing several camps and fixing this all the way from the top to the bottom so we could ferry supplies up. We would then have to surmount this 500-foot rock tower right here, which is dead vertical. Then it's about 1,500 feet from there to the true summit. This ridge right here, the West Ridge, has been climbed twice before, once by a Japanese women's expedition in 1970. The women that did climb the peak also reached the top of Everest. She was the first female to climb that peak in 1975. Prior to our expedition going over there, the year before, a Korean expedition went up this ridge and they lost one of the climbers while they were descending this route down here. The expedition arrived in Kathmandu on August 15th under a severe storm during the monsoon season. There are about 12 million inhabitants that live in Nepal. Most of them populate the countryside, but there are about 350,000 people that do live actually inside the city of Kathmandu, which is a fairly small town. It wasn't uncommon at all to find cattle roaming the streets, and it's a criminal offense for anyone to kick or slap these cows, and the policemen have the right to shoot you on the spot if they catch you doing this. In Nepal, it's the only country in the world where the state religion is Hinduism, and they also have between 10 and 15% of the population are Buddhists. It wasn't unusual at all to walk more than 50 yards at a time and not come across either a pagoda or a sacred water hole. And in this case, this is a circular stupa, which is a very tiny pagoda that the people who are of the Buddhist faith will pray before it, and they will usually leave little sacrifices, flowers, some gifts for the god Buddha. And up at the very top, you'll see the eyes of the ever-watching Buddha. There's an interesting story behind this little stylist pie shop. The person who owns the shop grew up in India, and he learned how to cook pies at one of the Western pie shops down there. And he brought his talents to the city of Kathmandu, and this place has developed into quite a prosperous little pie shop. One day before the expedition left Kathmandu for the village of Pokhara, myself and one of the other members spent a couple hours in this pie shop during the evening, and we proceeded to get very sick eating 5 pies. They had coconut cream pies and banana pies and chocolate. The expedition was in Kathmandu for about 10 days, during which we had to finalize our permission from His Majesty's government. We had to also purchase local supplies, some lanterns, a few stoves, and also hire a few of our porters. Some of the members spent a few hours each day just wandering throughout the narrow streets of Kathmandu, watching the people sell their supplies or their local produce, which they have harvested from the hillside. This is how the women over there wash their clothes. They don't have any modern conveniences at all. The women lead a particularly very rough lifestyle over there, and they're the ones that usually do most of the work. The men, though they do work, will spend almost half the day sitting around smoking and talking. She's fixing a chapati, which is a very thin flour pastry. We ate these quite often on our hike into base camp. The women age quite rapidly over in this country due to the hard work and the high amount of disease over there. This woman, I would suspect, is about 40 years old. I came across one lady over there who was 25, and she had most of her teeth missing and had aged very severely. Much of the handicraft items are made by hand over there. This person is working with some copper. After the expedition got permission for the peak and we were able to purchase our local supplies, we loaded everything on one of these trucks that we hired through our agent. The other members had to board one of the mini express buses. We were hoping to charter our own express bus to the village of Pokhara, but due to the lack of any available buses there, we had to ride with the locals. But every village on the way to this village of Pokhara, we had to stop, and the locals came on board with their produce, including chickens and eggs and vegetables. During the ride to Pokhara, we had to navigate some very dangerous roads that had been washed out during the monsoon storms. And one particular road that we came to had been washed out the week before, and there was a bus that had slipped off and fell about 1,000 feet down into the Modikola River, killing all 42 passengers aboard. And when we came to this spot in the road, the bus driver proceeded to tell us a story, and everyone on board started praying. At least that's what the natives did. And I remember leaning over the bus and looking out, and I couldn't even see any ground at all. All I saw was tires hanging partially over the side of the road. In the week afterwards, there was another accident in that area. The total distance from Kathmandu to Pokhara is about 180 miles. It took us a good part of the day to get there. And upon our arrival, we booked into the Hotel Snowview, paying $1.50 per 2 people a day. And this included breakfast as well. The town is quite a bit smaller and much more primitive than Kathmandu. There is very little electricity in this town, and the streets are pretty dirty. We spent the better part of 2 days purchasing the final supplies that we would need to get us to base camp. We bought a lot of potatoes and rice and dal, which is a form of a lentil bean that we used with the rice. We also purchased some hot peppers. The children over there were always fascinated by the Western visitors, and they were always trying to pose, and usually we would have to pay them about a rupee, which is about 12.5 cents. One of the team members wandered off one day and came across these Nepalis singing to this cobra snake. And so Ed decided to jump into the act here. And I always wondered why Nepal had such backward communications, and when I saw this telecommunications headquarters, I knew the reason right there. I tried to call home after I came off the mountain, and it took me 2 days just to get a message to the international operator, and my parents were never able to even reach me at all, and they tried about 5 days in a row. And during the monsoon storms, these power lines could fall down about once a week, and usually it would take that long to repair them. That was also the local bus station. We had to go through our 85 boxes and repackage the equipment so we could keep each box to about 50 pounds, which is about what one porter would carry, between 50 and 65 pounds. Sometimes the boxes only weighed 30 pounds. We would put 2 of them together. After we hired 85 porters, the team moved out through the city of Pokhara. It was quite a procession. We were all spread out about a mile. We used umbrellas to keep off the heat during the daytime, and also the rain. This was a very unusually clear day as we left the village of Pokhara. I'm going to point out the peaks here. Those who have read anything about Nepal will quickly see that this is the Machaputcheri Peak, commonly known as Fishtail. If you look at it from a different angle, which I will have a photograph of later on, you'll see why it's called a fishtail. This is our objective right here, Annapurna 3. We'll be coming in from the backside of the Fishtail Peak, going up on the west side. This is a 13,000-foot south face that has never been climbed before. In fact, no human being has ever been into the base of this south face route. Most of the days hiking the base camp were quite cloudy, and this was the only clear day that we had for almost 3 weeks. The team spread out and slowly moved along the trail. This is the beginning of a hike, and we had to cross a bamboo bridge. We had to cross several of these during the hike in the base camp. The people of Nepal are mostly farmers, and they're quite hardy people, and they will make use of any piece of land that will yield some rice or potatoes. And every day we came across these intricate terraced hillsides, and each terrace has its own irrigation system. People who have not been over to Nepal will tend to visualize the hike into base camp as being kind of a wilderness experience, and that's hardly the truth. But every 5 miles, the expedition and its 85 porters would stop at each village and have a tea break or a coffee break. And during the night, we would stop at one of these villages and sleep in one of the hotels or inns. If we couldn't find an inn, we would just pitch our tents. For about 5 cents, you could buy a bottle of 7-Up, which is it's equivalent to our 7-Up. They would have crackers and tea there. One of the team members is a skateboard enthusiast, and he decided to bring one of them over there with us. And every afternoon after we stopped at a village, he would pull the skateboard out from his pack and start going up and down some of the side streets, and the kids would see this and start rolling around him, and within a matter of minutes, all the kids would be trying to ride the skateboard. The porters are paid $1.85 a day to carry 60 pounds, and they are required to be responsible for their own food, firewood, and sleeping arrangements. We paid them about every 2 days, and when they first started out, we didn't give them any pay, so they would have to hang around at least 2 days to collect their money. A lot of teams have problems with porters dumping their equipment after they've been paid before the start of an expedition. Each porter was issued his own number, and in order for him to get paid, he would have to furnish us with his number. This porter was paid double wages for carrying about 100 pounds. In addition to the $1.85 that we paid the porters, we also had about 35 tennis shoes that we issued at this time to a few of the porters who wanted them, but most of them kept the tennis shoes for sale later on, preferring to wear either sandals or go barefooted. The entire hike into base camp was scheduled to take 8 days and would be about 85 miles, but due to a very dangerous river crossing at the words base camp there, you'll see where the trail crosses base camp. It took us 1 week to negotiate that river, transporting our equipment 4 miles to base camp from our temporary base just below the river. We had a major porter strike, and 70 of the porters quit and went back home. We kept 15, and by the end of the next week, when we transport all of our equipment to base camp, there were only 4 porters left. So that hampered our progress on the mountain, but didn't really put us too much behind schedule because the weather was very bad for the next 2 weeks. On the trip into base camp, we came across a lot of very interesting scenes, people working out in the fields, people in the villages, and a lot of very beautiful scenery shots. be the Fishtail Mountain. Base camp was at an elevation of 12,800 feet, and it was in a very desolate, rocky moraine area. The temperatures usually ranged around the 30s in the evening, and sometimes during the afternoon the temperature would rise about to 60 degrees, and we could sunbathe. We also did our washing there, and the reason we had the base camp here was because it was closest to our water supply. At this time, I'd like to introduce the team members on the climb. Ed Connor, at that time, was age 36. He was the oldest member of the expedition. He lives out of Palm Desert, California. He works as an irrigation contractor. Warner Landry lives in San Diego, California. He was age 31. He was also spending his honeymoon over here with his wife. We had hoped to make a 16mm documentary film of the expedition, and Tom McCullough came both as our cinematographer and climber. He lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and was age 28. Greg Sapp, at the time of the climb, was from New York City, and he worked as a travel agent. He was age 21, the youngest member of the expedition. And myself was age 23 at the time, from Fullerton, California. And I was kind of pushed into the role of leader on the expedition because no one else wanted the responsibility. Proved to be quite a chore. Two other members on the expedition. One was Dr. Dennis Coffey, a psychiatrist from USC. And on September 14th, a week after we had been at base camp, he was bitten by a centipede-like creature, and his right hand swelled to twice the normal size. And he had to be helicoptered from base camp to Pokhara, and then from there transported to Kathmandu because gangrene set into his right hand. He was later able to come back to base camp, but he couldn't help us out on the climb. Rick Mosier from Santa Barbara, age 31 at the time, is our most experienced ice climber, but because his wife, who was at base camp, became very ill, he was forced to leave just as the expedition was making its big push on the mountain, and he left on October 7th. I also want to add that last August, while participating in a rescue for some lost hikers up in the Sierra Nevada mountain range, he perished in an airplane crash. We also had 3 men and 4 females come to base camp, a few of the wives and girlfriends. This individual, Guy Andrews, was age 18 at the time. He was from San Diego, a friend of Warner Landry's. Before the climb was finished, he was to play a major part in the expedition's success on the mountain. I might add that he had no prior ice climbing experience before this. Every expedition is required by the government of Nepal to hire either a police officer or a member of the Mountaineering Federation. We hired Sam, who is age 28 and lives in the city of Kathmandu. He had to leave his wife and child for 2 months while he went with the expedition. We paid him roughly $200 a month, plus a bunch of equipment, which included 1 tent, 2 sleeping bags, plus double boots. After the team arrived at base camp, we were hoping to start progress immediately on the mountain, but the next 3 weeks we had to stay around in base camp, and we couldn't go any higher than our Camp 1 on a glacier due to the monsoon storms which hadn't let up by this time. As it turned out, this was one of the severest seasons that they've had in the last 10 years over there. All the major expeditions in the area were beset by severe snowstorms. One thing that didn't do much to keep our enthusiasm up was, but every week we had a mail runner bring up a newspaper from the capital city of Kathmandu, and the stories were always about climbers that were perishing in this area due to the avalanches caused by the severe monsoon storms. I might add that most of them were Japanese. During the 3 weeks that we were there, we did have a chance to do some investigating on the route that we were hoping to climb. And we were able to climb a grassy hill at about the 15,000 foot elevation, which led directly across the glacier at our objective. Again, this is the southwest buttress in the 2,500 foot rock wall, which consists mostly of crumbly rock. The ridge up here, we were hoping to put a camp around in here, then up in here, and then having one at the base of this vertical 500 foot rock wall. And then the summit's off back in here. The thing that was causing concern to the climbers was this hanging snow mass up here. And we weren't sure if it was going to fall off or not. Also of concern was the rotten rock plus the steepness of this rock wall up there. Yvon Chouinard, a famous ice climber out in California, has been into the sanctuary and has looked at this route and just shook his head several times when I spoke to him out in Ventura. Another option that was open to us to get on the mountain was to not go up this rock wall, but to circumvent the corner here and either go up this corner or go up this dihedral. 2 of the climbers were able to get down to the base at these avalanche cones right there, and there was constant water dripping off this rock, and it was overhanging. While we were up there looking at the peak, we noticed a scene that quickly changed our mind on the route. The force of this avalanche reached our temporary advance camp up on the high point of the glacier. Well, after a series of very heated arguments down at base camp as to which route we were to climb, it was finally decided to go ahead and attempt the west face of Annapurna 3, which had yet to this date been unclimbed. The team members weren't too enthused about going for a third ascent of the west ridge, which has been done twice before. So we decided to try to find some way to get to the main west face in the shadowy area apart. Our eventual route took us up this rock tower, and you can see the black dotted lines that show our progress. We had Camp 2 placed right on top of the rock wall at the first sign of snow. Camp 3, if I can point it out, is right there. Right there. And our hopes had been to put Camp 4 at this elevation, 24,000 feet, and from there go on to the summit. We were hoping to use fixed rope all the way to the top, but some of the members had expressed their desire to try to go alpine style from the base of the west face right here. It's 4,500 feet from this point up to here. We were constantly amazed at the size of these mountains over here. While sitting in my living room back in Fullerton, we only thought this rock wall would be about 500 feet high. It turned out to be 2,000 vertical feet. Being from California, a few of the climbers would constantly be at the base of this thing trying to pick out the nose or dihedral route on El Capitan.
One of the major problems we had on this climb was our great distance from the base of the mountain. We were almost 9 miles from base camp to that rock wall there in the background. We had to transport all of our equipment up over the moraine, cross a grassy hill up to 15,000 feet, then drop down into the Annapurna East Glacier. It took us almost 3 weeks to do this. We couldn't start until the last week in September. And this put us quite a bit behind schedule. Camp 1 on the glacier was probably the coldest spot on the climb. It was because it was at the bottom part of the East Annapurna Glacier, and all the cold winds would whip the air up across the snow into our tents. From there we progressed across the moraine and up through the ice field to the base of these rock towers. Of primary concern to the team members was, if we tried to climb this rock tower, would it continue on to the west face, or would it drop off onto their side? And few of the members expressed a desire to go up through the ice falls on either side of the rock tower. But on the ice fall to the left of the rock tower, there have been 9 people killed in that area since 1965, and none of the expedition members wanted to go into that area. One of the women at base camp, Ann Reynolds, decided to come up to Camp 1 and help the team out. The trip from Camp 1 to Camp 2 on the top of the rock wall took almost 12 hours because we had 2,000 feet of Jumaring with about 30-pound loads, and by the time we got back that night it was almost 8 o'clock, and the members didn't feel like fixing any dinner, and we had to get up at 4 o'clock the next morning. So she came up and did all the cooking for us. It was quite a help. Ed Connor and Warner Landry spent 2 weeks putting up the route from Camp 1, climbing the 2 rock towers, then establishing Camp 2. To climb this thing, and we were also trying to plan out possible strategies on the mountain.
Woke up, it was a Chelsea morning, and the first thing that I heard was the song outside my window, and the traffic wrote the words. It came ringing up like Christmas bells, and wrapping up like pipes and drums. Won't you stay, we'll put on the day, and we'll wear it till the night comes. Woke up, it was a Chelsea morning, and the first thing that I saw was the sun through yellow curtains and a rainbow on the wall. Red, green, and gold to welcome you, and crimson crystal beads to beckon. Won't you stay, we'll put on the day, there's a sun shower every second. It was a Chelsea morning, and the first thing that I knew, there was milk and toast and honey, and a bowl of oranges too. And the night poured in like butterscotch, stuck to all my senses. to stay, we'll put on the day, and we'll talk in present tenses.
After the two climbers had been able to find a route through the East Annapurna Glacier, they came to this rock wall. And they would start climbing, and the clouds would come in about 2 or 3 o'clock every afternoon, and they would only be able to make about 300 feet progress. So they would have to tie off the line, come back down, and this hampered their progress for the first week. There was also some pretty difficult rock climbing under these conditions. The climbing did get up to about 5'7". We had to use our tennis shoes. There was even talk one day about sending me up with my EVs to try to do some of the rock climbing, but they found an alternate way. For those that aren't familiar with rock climbing, this is a technique called jumaring, which utilizes a mechanical ascending device that grips to the rope as you slide it up, and when you pull down, standing into these stirrups, it locks into place and you're able to climb up this rope, transporting supplies from one camp to another. It proved to be a pretty strenuous process at the elevation between 15 and 16,000 feet. There was one point that we had to set up a pulley system to haul up our loads because there was a very difficult overhang to surmount. On this upper rock wall, only one person could do the entire thing at a time, and we had whistles that we would signal back and forth to the members. The reason for this was because of the tremendous amount of rotten rock, and all the other members would hover under one of the overhangs while the one person was up on the rock wall. After climbing the two rock towers, we went down this snow ridge, which was about a quarter mile in length. It wasn't too difficult, and at the end of the snow ridge we placed our Camp 2 at an elevation of 18,500 feet. At this altitude, the human body functions at 50% of its normal capacity, and we were starting to feel the effects of the altitude. But within a matter of days, the team members were acclimatized to the altitude, and we were ready to make progress higher up on the peak. Ed Connor and Warner Landry, who had put in the route up to this point, went back down to base camp for R&R, leaving myself, Tom, and Greg for the push from here on. This picture shows the distance that we had to go from base camp, which is the bend that you see in the river basin in the far background of the picture. It's about 9 to 10 miles from that point to Camp 2. The mountain on the left-hand side again is the Fishtail Peak. The weather, boy, what happened here? The weather during this time of the expedition was pretty good. We didn't have any storms, and the cloud cover was constantly below us. We had clear nights and mornings to climb. We did do a little bit of climbing during the nighttime with our headlamps. There was quite a bit of snow hiking mixed in with some vertical pitches of ice, but overall the climbing wasn't too difficult. These anchors that you see hanging from my harness were used to anchor the rope into the snow. Got something backwards here. Okay, I'm going to go on for a little bit, but I think I have something backwards here. Is it? Okay. Okay, just a minute. I got something backwards here, honey. Pardon me for just a minute. When one of the pictures didn't drop in, I got one of the pictures backwards. Oh, wait.
happened here? Oh, jeez. Oh, no. Oh, God. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on here. Oh, jeez. Yeah, it's supposed to be on manual. God, I see it's going bananas. Oh, jeez. Can't believe this. Come on. I know. God, I don't believe this. You better help me out.
Turn on the room lights,
Can I
start
get
fresh.
some light, please? Well, I know where I ended off. I can just get back there.
This has no effect, huh? Jeez.
Okay, that's right.
Right.
Okay, after 3 days of climbing up in this broken up ice glacier and vertical ice towers, we came to what we called the eyebrows. There were two vertical 30-foot sections of rotten ice that we had to climb over in order to get up to the upper plateau, which would lead to the Camp 3 location. The ice wasn't too difficult, but it did take about 2 hours to climb due to the rotten nature of it. It was very difficult to put any protection in. To further compound the problem, when I was leading out here, below me were some icicles that were sticking up about 20 feet below me. And if I did take a peel off of here, I would probably end up in the bottom of that little pit. The members at base camp were watching us while we were climbing up this. And during the 2 hours, they were wondering what was going on because they saw two of the climbers sunbathing in front of the eyebrows, but they couldn't tell where the third climber was. And about 2 hours later, I popped over the top and they saw my head come over. We went up the snow mound and placed Camp 3 up by the base of the rock wall up here. That spot right there. You can see it. It's hard to point it with this pointer here. Anyhow, I was at 20,300 feet, and from there it's about 4,500 feet to the summit. The next series of shots will give you a further idea of the type of climbing that we encountered on this expedition. Camp 3, as I said, was 20,300 feet high. The temperatures range anywhere from about minus 25 to about 5 degrees above zero. We were on a very narrow ledge that we had to carve out with snow shovels that dropped off about 2,000 feet below us. From here, the plan had been to send a couple climbers up the west face gully directly above us and place a fourth camp. But because of the concern of the oncoming winter season, and due to the lack of supplies that we were able to bring up to this high point, the team members had a council over on our walkie-talkies, and we decided to change the plan somewhat. And my pointer went out on me. Originally, the plan had been for the expedition. Okay, originally the team was to place the Camp 4 at the saddle right up here, which is 4,000 feet directly above our Camp 3 location. But because of the lack of team personnel, we felt we couldn't stock this camp adequately to make a push from the summit from there. So we decided to send up two climbers for an all-out attempt on the summit. We called up Ed and Warner, who were at Camp 2, and they came up to Camp 3 that day, and the next day they made their attempt on the summit. The climbers went up that left-hand gully there, straight up to the little snow arete, and then from there on up to the saddle. They got about 1/3 of the way up in that gully, and they had to retreat due to the lateness in the evening. They started climbing at 9 o'clock at night. We were fearful of climbing during the daytime because of the constant snow that was falling into the gully from above. We felt that climbing at night would increase the safety of the team members. We used headlamps when we were climbing up there. They got to the high point and came back down. And that morning, myself and Guy Andrews, who had been stationed at Camp 2 trying to recuperate for a possible second or third attempt, were asked to come back up to Camp 3 and fix in 1,000 feet of rope. So at 10 o'clock that morning, we trudged on up with 2 spools of 500 feet of rope, and we then proceeded to fix 1,000 feet of it in the gully. We were able to do this in about 2.5 hours. But after we fixed the rope up here, both Guy and myself were practically no use to the team anymore. I was suffering from a bronchial infection, and Guy had already burned himself out. This is the first time he'd ever been at this altitude. At this time, Greg Sapp and Tom McCullough, who had been down at Camp 2, also resting for a planned second or third attempt, came on up to Camp 3 at my request, and they were to fix another 500 feet of rope in the gully above our high point behind Warner and Ed as they made their push to the top later on that night. With the temperature at 2 degrees above 0 Fahrenheit, Ed and Warner took off at 7 p.m. on October 18th. 2 hours later, Greg and Tom headed off with 500 feet of rope. They slowly made their way up, and they got up to the arete, and then from there headed on up to the high saddle at 24,000 feet. But when they got up to that knife edge ridge there above the snow gully, they noticed that one of the climbers was catching up behind Warner and Ed, and that was Greg Sapp. Tom McCullough became very sick at about 22,500 feet, and he turned back for Camp 3. This left 3 climbers making the final summit push, with the 3 other climbers out of action for the rest of the climb. Meanwhile, the rest of the expedition was on the edge of their seats throughout the night, watching the climbers' progress. We could see their headlamps moving slowly up the ice gully. And later on, during the early morning hours of October 19th, we continued to watch their progress. At 12 noon, the 3 climbers reached 24,000 feet. If I can get this pointer to work, I'll show you here. Okay, 24,000 feet would be right there, and the summit is 24,787 feet high. They had been out all night climbing under sub-zero temperatures, and Warner's feet were starting to freeze on them. And when they reached the west ridge of Annapurna 3, there was about a 35-mile-an-hour wind coming across the plateau of Tibet that was hitting the climbers, and it quickly sapped all their energy from them. They sat down and made a decision not to go any higher. One of the reasons for this decision was the climbers didn't have any bivouac gear with them. And Tom McCullough had 1 insulite pad and 2 stoves in his pack, and he went back down. Greg Sapp, who was supposed to have that pack, had a useless 500-foot spool of polypropylene. So they left the spool up there and headed back down. Well, fortunately, they made the right decision, because if Warner Landry had descended on his own, he would have for sure slipped off the mountain. He was very delirious, and he was suffering from snow blindness. He forgot to put his snow goggles on due to the effect of the altitude. And he kept telling their 2 climbers that he could slide down to Camp 3, and he nearly pulled off Greg and Tom. But about 6 hours later, they arrived back in Camp 3, safe. This photograph was taken just minutes after their arrival back at Camp 3.
by Tom McCullough, who was still there. And it shows the strain of spending several weeks above 18,000 feet, plus the final push to the summit. That's Ed Connor. I've never seen him look quite this aged in my life. Well, the expedition had managed to put up a new route on the west face, and we felt that was consolation enough. We felt that the risk for going for the summit under the conditions that we were encountering were just far too great. So we succeeded in putting up this new route, and we came back to the States quite happy in our achievement. If there's any questions later on, I'd be happy to sit around here and answer any of them. Okay, thank you.